Gotta find my speech, which I wrote in a few time zones ago. I want to thank David for arranging this event, and of course Aram for getting those Balinese to dance up on stage. I thought for a while, please, big hand. I thought for a while the announcer was announcing that they were going to dance for 8 hours, but it was actually 8 minutes. So I'm happy that I can get some time to be up here to share with you. I also want to thank the other members of USINDO, particularly the seniors, including Stape Roy, who have helped in making this event, and all the other former ambassadors in Indonesia, including Bob Gilbert and Paul Wolfowitz, and also Joe and Miriam, who have kindly said kind words about Indonesia and the state of affairs between the US and Indonesia, and the future that lies in front of us. I just want to say that, well, also thanks to all the distinguished guests and sponsors who have made this event possible. I want to basically show my appreciation for the spirit that USINDO has been involved with, particularly with respect to advancing the educational agenda between Indonesia and the US. I know USINDO was assigned some years ago, as early as 1994, to promote issues on history, culture, politics, and the economy between the two countries, but education has been a big part of the equation, and I look forward to a greater number of exchanges between Indonesia and the US. Now, personally, I must say that I have been enamored with the educational system in Indonesia. I'm a product of the US educational system. My dad came out here for schooling, and my son has decided to go to college in the US. So and I was good enough to convince my wife to go to school in the US for her master's. So we had a really great time in New England to be able to spend time with my wife and 2 kids at that time. I've got 3 kids now. I've got a daughter who's 10 years old. And we put a lot of premium on the quality of the education in the US. I don't think it was the McDonald's in Hollywood that attracted me to the US. It was really the thinking within the family that the US education would provide the necessary broad-based thinking for anybody who would study here. I remember when I came out here in 1983, I only wanted to be Jimi Hendrix. And I got a music scholarship in a small liberal arts school in Wisconsin. I spent 2 years in Wisconsin. It was too cold for me. So guess where I transferred to? Texas. So where there's more sun, more warmth. And I was not able to complete my schooling as a musician because my mom would not permit me from coming back as a son and also as a musician. So I ended up taking accounting. So I became an accountant, and I was grateful for the opportunity that was given by my family to come out here and make it happen. I only started out with a few $1,000s in my pocket, and with that and scholarships and washing dishes and playing piano at various kinds of nightclubs, and what I was able to graduate, become a real guy, and got a real job, and lived there for more than 10 years. And I've earned my dinner tonight. One can say that the legacy of the current government of the Republic of Indonesia would be twofold. The first one would be, I think, the sustained economic trajectory of Indonesia by way of the robust domestic consumption propensity, and also the robust investment and the robust or increasingly robust government spending and external trade for some years, but I think it'll come back when there's a resuscitation of the global economic situation. And this is, I think, an important legacy by the current administration, by President SBY. And the second legacy is with respect to the consolidation of the ideologies. And I think you're likely to see a consolidation of the ideologies by way of the increase of the nationalist agenda holders' presence by this year and next year. And that, I think, makes more and more people in Indonesia comfortable with where the future is going to go. On the economic front, if we would have gone back to the founding father, President Sukarno, he would have left Indonesia in the late 60s with a GDP per capita of a mere $400. Then when Suharto took over, he was able to rebuild the economy for 30 years. But unfortunately, by way of the Asian financial crisis, as he was getting that number up to about $1,200 for a GDP per capita, the Asian financial crisis unfortunately brought it back down to about $600. Then President Habibie, President Gusdur, President Megawati helped democratize Indonesia, helped resuscitate the economy of Indonesia, and brought about a bigger delta to the GDP per capita of Indonesia from the $600 to a little over $1,000. And that's when SBY came into the picture in 2004 at a GDP per capita of $1,100. And after 8.5 years, the GDP per capita of the country stands at about $4,000. So it has quadrupled. Thanks. And Indonesia now belongs to the $1 trillion club, the club of economies that have at least $1 trillion each. It is the 15th largest economy in the world, which is why we're a member of the G20. And if we were to grow at 5 to 6% real rate per year, there's a good chance Indonesia could become the 10th largest economy by the year 2020, barring catastrophic scenarios. Much has been accomplished in the last few years, more particularly the last 15 years. I remember in 1998, Indonesia was economically and politically moribund. My salary dropped by 80% in a few weeks' time when the rupiah went up from 2,000 to 17,000 in a matter of weeks. That was when I got the reality check that I should pursue my second master's. And I did, but for some reason Indonesia was able to reboot itself, not only politically but economically. And if we were to go back, to 1998 and how things would have gone, things could have gone a totally different way from how it has or how they have. And it's, I think, the one up there who's been taking care of business, plus the people of Indonesia. And the people of Indonesia and also the leadership of Indonesia have certainly helped shape the country the way it has been moving the past 15 years. I get asked a lot, including when I appear at a panel in Davos or some other international fora, why are you not fulfilling the human rights requirement? Why are you not fulfilling the democratization requirement? Why are you not fulfilling the economic sustainability requirement? Why are you not fulfilling this and that? I said, okay. You know, you want me to tick off each one of these boxes, you gotta give me some margin of error. We're not perfect, but I think if you ask me as to whether or not Indonesia is likely to be better or better off 5 to 10 years from today, I think there's a good chance Indonesia will be better, if not better off, in each one of those boxes that you want me to tick off. And this is a country that I think has decided to want to be a member of the global community in a good way. Democratization that's becoming more and more mature is visible in our eyes in Indonesia. And Indonesia has been able to continually remedy its records on human rights and corrupt practices. Thank you. For that, I'll get dessert. And Indonesia has been mitigating the risks of flashpoints caused by internal, communal, religious, and ethnic conflicts that we've seen in the past many decades. Indonesia has been vigilantly progressing on the counter-terrorism efforts. Indonesia has been increasing its role in the economic and geopolitical construct. As a member of the G20, we are obligated to basically listen to the aspirations of other members of the G20, and we're also obligated to present where we want to be in the future. And I think things are continuously gelling in the right order. None of these would have been possible without a greater economic pie creation. The economic pie has gone up by way of a few things. If we take a look at investment, investment has been going up nicely, 25 to 30% per year. Fixed capital formation has gone up to about 32% of the GDP. And the good thing about it is fixed capital formation has been underpinned by strong FDI, which has increased 25 to 30% per year in the last 3 years. And the other good thing is that capital deployment to places outside Java has gone up. If we were to go back in 2009, capital deployment to outside Java or the island of Java was only 18% of the total amount. And it went up to 33% in 2010. It went up again to 41% in 2011, and it went up again to 46% in 2012. Chances are in 2013, capital formation in places outside Java will probably go up to about 48% of the total amount, and the total amount having increased about 25 to 30% each year. That's good, because when we talk about maintaining the unity of 17,000 islands, 250 million people, we've got to make sure that money goes to as many different places as possible. And it's the areas outside Java that matter the most. Now, the demographics also have been instrumental in fueling the domestic consumption propensity. The profile is such that 60% of the population are younger than 39 years old, 50% are younger than 29 years old, and at the rate that we reproduce, we are likely to maintain that demographic profile in the next 10 to 15 years. So I think the challenge going forward depends on the extent to which we're going to put the vitamin, the education, all the good things for the young of Indonesia. Tax collection has been going up. Last year, tax collection is about 500% of what it was when SBY took power. And this has been helpful in decentralizing our fiscal posture. Our decentralization into the regions has gone up big time. And money has been channeled to various places in Indonesia. Now it's all about whether or not this money is going to be more targeted for the purpose that would be noble for the future of Indonesia. And there also has been an increase in spending on education. We're mandated to spend 20% of our budget on education. And that budget alone last year was about 35 billion US dollars. You know, it's funny, we were at a cabinet meeting a few days ago. We were talking about how we should lower our budget within each ministry, within each department, by way of our aspiration to raise the fuel price, hopefully as soon as the 15th of June. The only ministry that cannot, by constitution, lower its budget is that of the education. That may be troubling to other ministers who have to lower their budget by 10 to 15%, including me, but it is noble because it only means that there's going to be money for people to go to schools anywhere in the world. Now, we've just got to make sure that the leadership and the vision are there for people to attain the necessary good quality education. Let's talk about the challenge of Indonesia. I think the challenge for Indonesia, if I can put it in simple terms, since Joe is here, is that we've got to Gangnam ourselves. I'm so inspired by Gangnam. Gangnam, or the Gangnam style, or Psy, epitomizes a few things. It epitomizes technological advancement, economic advancement, cultural advancement, and also an improving democratic value. That's really what Indonesia has to do in the next 10 to 20 years. The next 10 to 20 years, Indonesia has got to make sure that it takes advantage of whatever is going to happen in the country. Now, let's take a look at the potential economic outlook of Indonesia. If we were to accumulate the GDPs of Indonesia in the next 20 years, starting from $1 trillion US, if we were to extrapolate it at a 5 to 6% real growth, there is a chance that we will end up with a $6 to $7 trillion economy 20 years from today. Now, if we were to accumulate all those, the accumulation of the GDPs would stand at around 60 trillion US dollars. If we were to go by the assumption that 50 to 60% of that will be related to domestic consumption, then we know Indonesians are going to be consuming cumulatively in the next 20 years about $36 trillion. If we know that the government budget is going to be 20% of the GDP, we know cumulatively the government is going to be spending about 12 trillion US dollars. If we know that the government is going to be spending 20% of its budget on education, the government of Indonesia cumulatively is going to have about 2.4 trillion US dollars. If we know we're going to have 2.4 trillion US dollars cumulatively in the next 20 years, we're going to have enough money to put just about any Bambang, Budi, John, and whatever from Indonesia in every campus of the United States. Wouldn't you like that? The sad part is, if you go to Colombia, there's 1,200 Chinese. There's only 11 Indonesians. If you go to Harvard, there's 700 Koreans. There's only 5 Indonesians. If you go to Oxford, there's hundreds of Americans, hundreds of Chinese, only 5 Indonesians. If you go to Cambridge, there's probably about 650 United States citizens. There's only 11 Indonesians. We're not Gangnamming ourselves well. We've got to game change this. And I think it's about time that we've got to make something happen. Now, it'd be sad if we're not going to do much more about the supply side of the equation, knowing that there is going to be about $36 trillion worth of goods and services that will be consumed by Indonesians, the 250 million people in Indonesia in the next 20 years. We've got to do something about the supply side of the equation. That means we've got to do something about increasing our production and also increasing our productivity in key sectors such as agriculture, such as manufacturing, such as services, but also the funding strategy has to gel with all these that we have to do in the next 10 to 20 years. This will require a massive amount of investment in human resource development. I've highlighted the comparisons of the number of students from Indonesia. In my time, we had 15,000 Indonesians studying in the US. Now there's only 7,900. David has got his work cut out to double that number. But I told him, look, I'm not thinking of doubling. I'm thinking of quadrupling. And if strictly from a fiscal standpoint, we've got the money. Every year, we're spending $35 billion, increasing at about 7 to 10%. But we just need to make sure. Now let's pause for a moment. If we were to send about 1,000 students to Stanford or all the great universities in the US at $50,000 a pop, that's only $50 million, 1,000 students. So if we were to send 10,000 students to the United States every year, that's about 500 million US. I'm not sure if $50,000 will be able to be enough for Stanford education. I guess you would have to live in a sleeping bag. But, assuming that's the figure, we can certainly fiscally afford it. This is a country that stands at a debt-to-GDP ratio of 23%. Let's not forget, 10 years ago, it was at about 80 to 90%. And at the rate we don't like to borrow, in 5 years' time, that debt-to-GDP ratio is likely to drop to below 20%. So the key is we've got to build the system. We've got to build the human resources. We've got to build the soft infrastructure and also the hard infrastructure. This is a reality and a necessity. And if we do this, this will help us cope with the increasing tendencies of multilateral thinking. We have opened our doors by way of the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement that has been signed with the 6 strategic partners, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreements that we've been engaged with a number of strategic partners, and also the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnerships that we've been engaged in discussions with the relevant strategic partners. We can't unwind all these. At the rate we're opening up the doors, we've got to be ready. And the thinking cannot be about being self-sufficient. The narrative ought to be about becoming an efficient exporter. That, I think, is a narrative that's missing amongst many people in Indonesia. Now let's switch to the political front. What's going to happen beyond SBY? I think it's anybody's game. But here's a few factors to consider. Anybody that wants to run for president has to be supported by any party or a group of parties that would have garnered at least 20% of the votes. There is likely to be about 170 million voters who are qualified next year, of which probably about 20 to 25 million people will be new voters entering the system. These are the new 17-year-olds who will not be reading newspapers. They'll be using their gadgets to read whatever sports, whatever business, whatever technology news they want to read about, they want to know about. These are the Selena Gomez's and the Justin Biebers of Indonesia. Now, I think they will help shape the political process of Indonesia. And most of these 170 million people are likely to be female and youthful. And a good chunk of these are Javanese. Around 60% of the 170 million people will be Javanese. And 70% of the police and 70% of the military are Javanese. These are factors and facts for your consideration. The paradigm of millions that can vote, I think, ought to change to the paradigm of the millions that we can choose from. And that's important for the new generation of Indonesia. I think in an ideal world, the leader or the future leader of Indonesia is one, she or he, who understands how to package economic prosperity with equity, pluralism, democratization, and all the governance-related stuff bundled in one package. Thank you. I've just earned my coffee. And she or he is somebody who can actually project that bundle in a nice way onto the international community. She or he is somebody who can make sure that this gets understood the right way by the international community. But as with politics, anything is possible. And things usually don't work out in accordance to how you want them to work. And that's the reality that we've got to live with. And I think some of that is attributable to the degree to which we were educated, which is why I think in the long term, and it's important for Indonesians to increasingly capture, embrace, and get the right long-term picture. One can expect an increase in political activities in Indonesia. It's actually started. And it's started to get really busy, in terms of political activities. And busy political activities are usually good for the media guys. And it's also good for the economy. And you can anticipate an uptick in economic activities in Indonesia. The key for Indonesia's democratization, as some might coin it, democracy 2.0. And it's really about game-changing the governance. And this is entirely possible if one looks at our fiscal space, which can be used for a more targeted approach in terms of enhancing our human resource development. We've got to think about attaining 150 to 200,000 PhDs in the next 15 to 20 years. And the corresponding numbers of masters, bachelors, polytechnics, and plumbers. And we've got to make sure that all these numbers are in sync with our long-term industrialization plan so that it gels and it does the right thing for the people. And we've got to make sure that we get more protein and nutrition into the kids that enter the kindergartens, the elementary schools, the primary schools, and all that good stuff. And we've got to make sure that all these plumbers, technicians, engineers, and thinkers have the right tactical and strategic plan for Indonesia in the next 10 to 20 years. We've got to make sure that we need to further technocratize the bureaucracy. I think there ought to be fewer, if not less, political party presence in the bureaucracy. I've gotten a good taste of that in the last 3 years. And this, I think, will help us in stamping out corruption, and this will improve governance at every level with well-defined parameters that are in sync with the global paradigm. We need to make sure that there's further fiscal decentralization using the right carrot and stick measures in view of a more investment-centric paradigm, particularly for soft and hard infrastructure. We probably need to simplify the political process. Did you know that every 5 years we have around 500 elections? That's 2 in a week. Yeah, it's good for the media. We've got to make sure that a bunch of these elections take place in one go. So at least you have some pause for weeks, if not months, to think and to do things. This, I think, will help Indonesia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the geopolitical and economic constructs are evolving, ever-changing. There's flashpoints in the Korean Peninsula, Strait of Hormuz, the South China Sea, Syria, Palestine, and all these other places that we've got to worry about. There is continuing stagnation in the European economies. There is an improving economy in the US. There is a deceleration in China's economy. This has and will affect the lives of billions on this planet. A prolonged global economic slump poses a risk on our democratic institutions and values. And I think this is a reality that we've got to deal with. I think Indonesia has done okay, considering the circumstances that we've gone through. The future is really up to us. Many of us are quite clear-headed. That is, we've got to Gangnam ourselves. Actually, allow me to change it. We've got to Garuda ourselves. And I think we've got a chance to make it happen if we get the long-term picture. Thank you all for the opportunity. Good night.